So usually the part where we sit here quietly and wait for people to show up. We already got 8 people here already. So yay!
Rock on.
All right, boys, girls, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Automotive Podcast. We don't have to build model cars, but it sure does help. This is episode 8. We are back from our respective breaks. Mr. Chester has booked us our large brand name guest on here, Mr. Randy Derr. Sean is back from his exploits in the theater, and I am back from Madison, Wisconsin, where we had the 2024 IPMS Nationals. So, James, I just saw you last weekend. So, Sean, what's been going on?
Oh man, I've been busy the past month. I had a role in theater production of Bye Bye Birdie. So I do summer theater with my son, and so we just I was busy doing that, and that we ran over the weekend, and it's all done, and I'm ready to turn my attention back to model cars for a little while.
Right. Randy, we last saw you at NNL East. I don't need a day by day of the last 4 months, but what's been going on modeling wise in your world?
Sadly, it's been kind of slow in the hobby bench for this summer. There's been too many other interruptions and other projects around the house and my children's homes. So I've been trying to work on a few things. I got a couple projects going. One that James and I talked about at Akron last year, the Dodge Charger stock car. And he helped me out with some reference information on suspension and engines, carburetors, I believe. So that one's still going on. And then to just add a little bit of a distraction, I started a 43rd scale arena model. Surprisingly, maybe it's a Greenwood Corvette. It's the tube frame car. Just wanted to put one of those together kind of quickly. So,
wow, tiny.
Yeah, 43rd scale. They're fun. They're kind of like little appetizers. You can do them relatively quickly. They're not too complex, and they look nice. They're little jewels sitting on the shelf, and you move on.
Rock on.
Yeah.
Rock on.
Mr. Chester.
So I had some disappointing news today. My 3D printer that I waited for almost a month for showed up with a cracked screen. So I'm really kind of bummed tonight. I'll get another one. I'll just return it and get another one. So another couple days without a 3D printer, I'll be all right.
I was kind of wondering what the policy was there. If they were going to be able to the replacement part issue, or you're going to have to send the whole thing back.
I think after spending the money that I spent, that I should have gotten a good one, and I shouldn't have to do any work to it. So give me my money back.
Did you order that directly from them, or is that like
I did. Amazon? I did order it directly from Elegoo.
Where are they located, James?
California.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so that was an Elegoo then?
Yes. Yeah.
All right. Let's say me. You know me. I'm sitting here circulating around the drain that is Anycubic, thinking about buying one. And I'm like, I don't want to buy an Anycubic. It's going to come in pieces. But heck, if that wasn't that, then I'm not so fearful.
Right.
So I mean, that really is a bummer to have to, because you were waiting on that for a little while. That was
it was supposed to be here on Friday, and they were like, "Oh no, we're going to deliver it on Monday." I'm like, I wanted the weekend.
It was under a truck somewhere. Sorry.
And
come on back. Oh, too far.
So then, it said from 10 to noon it was going to be delivered, and it didn't get delivered until 5:40 p.m. I was like, come on.
Took them longer to break the screen.
Yeah, it took them longer. Anyways.
We hadn't completely destroyed it yet.
Right. So I have other projects going on, trying to finish up the PZY BMW. Got all the decals done. It's all cleared. Just finishing up the rest of the project.
If anybody sees me do one of these things, there's a fruit fly down here. Just so we nip that in the bud right there.
I thought you were applauding me.
Well, yes, very good, very good. You didn't throw a fit. I'm impressed. I would have been less receptive to their customer service, given that they were probably still open when you got that. Um, like I said, went up to Madison, Wisconsin for the IPMS Nationals, and as usual with everything that we do on this show, I'm not prepared, but I am now. The three things I guess that we could talk about real quick here before we dive off into grilling Mr. Derr are the three items that were up for display at the Revel booth,
Oh,
for
yeah.
lack of a better term. If I can, let's say, why is it? Oh, the sharing isn't working again this week. Why would it be working? Let's see. Ah, there we go. All right, here we go. So the first, what they had on display were the Stranger Things kits. These were going to be a series of kits that are coming from Revel with a tie-in to the Netflix show. I personally have not watched it. Couldn't tell you anything about it. It's apparently things that are strange, and they're going to be doing two old kits that exist in a brand new tooling. The two kits that exist already that are past kits. This is the old Monogram 124 scale 79 Chevy Camaro kit. 3-in-1. I think this kit's been around since I believe the early 1980s, and you're going to get pretty much all the parts with this that you would have gotten in the past, except that it has a newly tooled body with a actual coupe roof to it. The T-tops are now gone,
Okay.
and then you're getting a flat hood. So you still get all the blower motor and all that part. So you got the hood with the hole in it and the old Z28 hood, but you get a base model hood in the regular coupe body. So those are the new parts to that. It does have the old Monogram, goodness of having the rear end and the exhaust and the suspension and everything all be one big blocky. And as people have pointed out to me, and I really didn't pay attention to in real time because I was running around, very flashy test shot. Like there's a lot of flash on this. So it's that tool's starting to show its age. I need to clean that up just a little bit.
Zoom in on that engine bay. They had a
Engine
chance
bay.
to fix the molded in battery, the molded in all that nonsense there. They had a chance if they retooled that body to fix all that, but they chose not to.
I'm gonna guess that what they did was make a new top insert to this. It's just gonna, like, you could see the mold lines really prominently here. I'm gonna guess
Okay.
that you're getting this and like the just literally the top of the roof tacked on as being a piece. These old school Revel and Monogram molds tended to be like a giant mold, like everything is in it, so it's not modular like modern tooling is. So you're kind of limited to what you can do. That's sort of why this flat hood is stuck way off here in the corner, off this part that has these random pieces to it, just sort of chucked over here because there was some space on the tool. So there's that. The other thing would be that's old is what they're calling the Surfer Boy Volkswagen pizza van. This is the Volkswagen Type 3 van, Revel Germany kit. Again, it's from the 1980s. The new pieces here these two sprues here with the Surfer Boy pizza sign for the roof. It's got that little underneath the front or above the front bumper, below the headlight grill piece. So North American bumpers, and I don't know, looks like North American license plate banks. I don't know if this is a pizza box. And I don't know if this is maybe a brace for the sign, but at any rate, that's it. Other than that, if you've had this kit in the past, then you know what you should expect from it. And then the last thing, the new toolkit, the one that I think a lot of people are waiting for, perhaps not quite as much as the Corvette per se, but certainly something that's been of interest to a lot of people since it was announced, is the K5 Blazer, mainly because this is a new tool. It's not based on one of the old either Monogram or Revel square bodies. So this has just a pile of parts on it. There are, as people have now pointed out again through time, there's these round spotlights up here that don't go to anything right now. There's also a set of the smaller, like double stacked headlights that don't go to this specific Blazer. So, I mean, shock of shocks, Revel is tooling this up for multiple uses. Obviously, have to.
Right.
But it is pretty well detailed for what it is. It's got these Lincoln Log die-casty wheels. I'm not a huge fan of them. Mobius uses those. Stop reinventing the wheel. Just use poly caps and be done with it at this point. But it's like very well detailed. I mean, you got backs to the brake drums, and it's pretty well detailed.
It's got an engine.
It does have an engine. You got a conversion box or a transfer box for the rear end there. This sprue right here, and probably this sprue right here, will be your chrome parts. This is like the base of the light bar, the mirrors, the bumpers, the front grille. It is a platform style interior. You'll notice over here your frame rails are actually separate pieces.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, there's actually a little bit of tire tread. You can't see it in this picture; it'll pixelate out. But where the spare tire is sticking out of the spare tire carrier, there's actually a little bit of a tire tread accent to it. And there was a built-up shot of the actual suspension itself. So, I mean, it's even got a steering arm, which is always one of those goofy things to put in a model kit, in my opinion, because these wheels aren't going to really turn in real life. I don't understand the point of this, but
yeah,
it's there.
It's nice. It's a nice chassis there. I can see that migrating over to other things.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure we'll get some sort of backwoods giant 4-wheel drive truck at some point out of this, and
right.
I think this is probably. I mean, I'm by no means an expert on K5 Blazers or anything like that, but I think that's too short a wheelbase for a pickup. People would have to let me know. I don't know if you can make a pickup out of that or not, but anyway,
you're real short bed.
Yeah, I was gonna say very, very short bed. Yeah.
But,
with those
pieces in that kit look a whole lot like the Mobius Ford truck. I wonder if there's been some crossover of tool designers or kit designers between those two companies.
It could be. I mean, Mobius, at least when they started out, back when they were still being owned by Winspur, they were using. We always say his name on here now. It just went out of my head. The guy at AMT.
Mueller.
Yeah. John Mueller was a consultant on those early Mobius kits. Why, to me at least, like the Hudsons and the Fords feel very what AMT would be if they had kept going and hadn't been bought out in the late 90s, because that's his design influence in those.
Mm-hmm.
So, and other than that, I judged Friday night. Best Automotive was won by a 124 scale model factory hero. Shelby was a Shelby Cobra Daytona, the coupe version of the Cobra. Very nice. Anybody knows the Model Factory Hero kit knows that's a very, very expensive box of parts that you have to then assemble into something. They're not the world's greatest kits straight out of the box. And good time was had by all, I think. Beautiful venue, right on the lakefront in Madison. It is, as we sit here and talk about it, 373 days until next year. So book your vacations now. Hampton, Virginia. Go. I already Airbnb'd a beachfront house for my family that week. So now, granted, Hampton's on the wrong side of the river from the beach. It's on the wrong side of the Hampton Roads Tunnel, but it's a good family location.
James, how many models did you have on display?
The contest was, at the last count I saw, was 2,958 models in the contest. And then there were 700 models in a thing that we were calling the Tiger Meet, which is a reference to like the NATO airplane shows, but it was a display-only area. People were familiar with the Telford show, which is the IPMS Nationals in the UK. That is a very small contest with a huge display room. The clubs tend to get together and put out their club displays of all their club members building models. And so this was an attempt to sort of further that. You hear a lot of people say, of course, that I don't build for contests and stuff like that. So this was an opportunity for you to bring out whatever you wanted to bring, and it wasn't judged and nobody was going to say anything. There was quite a few things in there that you obviously would not have ever entered in your local contest, alone a national, but that was the point of it. And there were around 700 models on display in the display area. So that will be something that continues into Hampton next year, and then 2026 has already been bid on, and that's going to be in Fort Wayne, Indiana. Try to hold down your excitement of the idea of going spending a week in Fort Wayne in the middle of the summertime, but that's who bid. That's who bid, and that's who got the 2026 Nationals, but it was pretty popular. I think it is, as Randy and I were speaking off air there, a guy named Don Schmitz, who's a local guy to my IPMS club, was in charge of that event, and certainly was a what we learned experience because nobody had tried to do this before. So best practices go on to the next show, and hopefully that'll go on. We had a Chinese fire drill at the end of the day there when they were trying to reset the room for the next convention, and people were like, "Oh, we'll come get our models whenever." Like, yeah, you come get them now, or they're gonna wind up in the trash because like they're tearing the tables down right now. Come get your stuff. So
out of that 2,000 some models, how many do you think were automotive?
I would say, let's see, I judged 4 categories. There were 22 altogether automotive. There were probably, I'm going to say 350, maybe 400 or so. That doesn't count collections, and there's the thing called the triathlon where you build 3 things that are vaguely connected to each other, but they're different genres. So it's a plane, a tank, and a car, or a figure and a car and a boat, or they all have to connect to each other in some form or fashion. That's a pretty loose interpretation of how they're connected, but it's the idea is that it's 3 genres by one builder, so that doesn't count into that. But yeah, we had competition automotive was the largest category. That ended up getting split foreign and domestic as far as like how they divvied the split up, and it was almost 50 in that total. So it was almost an even split of about 25 American domestic cars and about 25 everything. I mean, it was British touring and GT3 and all the various genres of automotive racing, and I think everything else had somewhere around 15 to 20. So extrapolate that out to 20. What does that work out to be? About 400 or so. So I mean, it's not NNL East by any means, but it was a good showing. They ran out of space. We had to move the cars into other things. There were a few airplanes categories that had like 2 airplanes that sort of got shuffled into themselves so that we'd have more space for the car stuff. But it was all in all a pretty decent turnout.
Cool.
So everyone to Virginia next year. We'll buy a table. We'll have some place to sit.
So we brought Randy on board this week, and I want to pick his brain till cows come home. But do you guys have any questions for him before I get started?
Well, I mean, I could do like the basic intro questions, but like I've not seen James's list of questions, so I have no idea what he wants to say.
Okay. James doesn't have a list of questions. He's going to go. So we were talking just before you two showed up about super glues, and Randy informed me that he uses a UV glue that's cured with a little UV light, and you like that a lot better because it sets up quickly.
Yes, and it seems to have very good strength as well once you get it cured with the UV. It seems to me stronger than most regular cure CA glues.
I'm going to have to get one. And Sean, you already use that too. James, do you have any of that?
I do not. I know people that use it. I've not heard any complaints about that.
The other thing I kind of like about it is you can almost use it like Bondo. You can build it up a thickness, kind of grind on it.
Not to do any product placement here, but this is what I found at the Lowe's store, and this is what I've been using. In fact, on the Corvette model, I took CA glue and plastic styrene dust, basically just sanded a piece of styrene, make a big pile of dust, and would use that as body filler because I didn't want any putty shrinking and cracking later in life.
Okay.
But it would work really well with the UV cure, I would think also.
Yeah.
Lewis says JB Weld makes a UV glue, but I only use it when it's getting painted over. I've had it fog up on stuff on me. So that's yours is JB Weld, right?
That's correct. Yep.
Okay. We did a little experiment before coming on, and he tried it on some clear glass, and it said it didn't fog, but
didn't seem to. But it wasn't a brightly polished piece. It was part of sprue. So I'll have to try it on an actual glass panel and
Okay.
and we'll see what it does. But yeah, I could believe that from his perspective, that it'd be better for joints that don't show or that you have to paint.
Okay. All right. So, Randy, when you're getting started, you build like projects. Like I build model cars, Sean builds model cars, James thinks about building model cars, but you build projects. So how do you focus in on, say, I'm going to build a Corvette that's going to take me 2 years to build? How do you define the project, or does it just keep growing and growing?
Well, no, usually the scope of the project I have defined in my head before I start. And there's kind of like three categories as I think through it. There's, I'm just going to build this and do an okay job with it. Not a lot of detail, not a lot of scratch building. Let's just get one together and see what it looks like. Then there's kind of a mid-range one where we're going to put some detail in it. It's still mostly a kit build, but it's detailed. So I got to do enough research to know where all the plumbing goes and the wiring and all that sort of thing, and correct any kit inaccuracies. And then there's what I call the major projects that take years to build. Those, I go into them knowing they're going to be full detail. It's basically building a car, just much smaller. All the same parts have to be created and made to look correct. The research material has to exist. I'm not a model artist like a John Teresi who can look at a subject and perfectly model it in scale without measurements. I can't do that. Too much engineer in me, I guess. So if I can get the dimensions and the reference material, I'm just building small cars.
So you're finding, say, like a shop manual for each piece or every component, right?
Well, that's one source. My preferred sources for research material are the actual car itself. If I'm doing a replica of a full-size car, I got to track down the full-size car, try to get the people who are in charge of it to let me come measure it, photograph it, make drawings. I've done that several times, and that works the best.
People are real receptive to that, to say, oh, okay, come on over, crawl all over my car.
More than you think. I've been surprised several times by how receptive and open they are to helping a guy out with that sort of thing, especially a vintage car, because now you're approaching these people years after they've worked on it. The immediacy of the next race is years in the past for them. They're now being nostalgic about it, perhaps, and remembering it. And to them, it's like, wow, somebody else knows about this car I worked on and cares about it enough to spend time building a replica of it. And so I think in a way they're touched by that, and they like to help out.
Have you ever shown your finished project to the owner?
Oh, yes. Yeah, that happens as often as it can. With the sprint car model that I built back in the earlier 2000s, I was unable to show it to the owner. He passed away in the middle of the project, but he did get to hold the chassis and the roughed in bodywork and suspension and all that. It was to a point. He got to hold that. And then his sons and grandson, who also worked with him on the restoration of the full-size car, they've seen it many times and have been involved in it. So that's always a neat little payoff, is when you can show it to the people that were helping you out with the research.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So then once you get past, okay, I got the full-size car and I've got it measured and photographed, then you get to work building and you realize I don't have near enough information. And you may or may not be able to go back to the full-size car. Like with the Greenwood Corvette, it just wasn't practical to fly back to France to measure a couple of things. So in that case, I turn to the internet, see what kind of pictures I can find there. One source that really kind of may be surprising is for production-based car parts. I go to eBay because you'll find all kinds of pictures from all kinds of angles, and often they'll have a tape measure by it. I don't know why, but they do. And so you can get really good photos there that you can grab and put in your reference file and use those. I've also been known to go to local car shows with a tape measure in hand and the phone on, with the camera and get information that way too for production-based race cars that I build. So
very cool. Very cool.
The sources, you take them where you can find them. On the Greenwood car, I was within a few months of finishing it and put a request out on a Greenwood group on Facebook with a picture of one of the markings on the side of the car. It was hard to tell what it was. And I said, does anybody know what this is? And they have any better pictures of it? And one of the people on that group sent me a link to a photo archive associated with a university here in the United States. And it was a alumni of theirs who had been a photographer, and he had photographed the 24-hour Daytona race the year that Greenwood Corvette raced there. And all of his pictures were archived on this university's site, and you could download what you needed. And I got like about 24 brand new photos I'd never seen before of that car as it raced at that event. I had to change a few things because I had taken some guesses at some things like the shape of the rear spoiler, but it was well worth it. So you just never know where you're going to find information on these projects.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
I should say I feel like we've not given Randy a proper introduction yet. We all know him and know his name well, but maybe if you're newer to the hobby or maybe a younger modeler, you may not know Randy. I would say Randy is probably one of the top 10 model car builders like of all time. And it probably at the top of that list, in the top to like 2 or 3. How many times have you won Salt Lake?
4 times.
4-time best of show winner of Salt Lake. That is quite an achievement. Has anybody won more often than you?
No. Going into the last one 2 years ago, there had been three-time winners. Augie Hiscano was one. Sadly, Augie passed away many years ago. The other 3-time winner, besides myself, was Mark Jones. And it came down to Mark and I in competition at that last GSL with his incredible Lola T70, also 1 total scale. And so it was a fun competition, but that last one broke the tie, so to speak.
Right. So I'd say it's a great honor to have Randy on our show because, he's one of the all-time greats. And it's, I remember reading the pages of Scale Auto many years ago and just, salivating over the builds. And I remember reading the article about the 69 Sunoco Camaro that you built.
Yes.
And, just learning so much from the techniques. And I think you had laser engraved on a drum to get the tire tread.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. I didn't even know these things sort of existed or that, you could do those sort of things. And so it's a honor to have you on the show tonight.
Well, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, and I really appreciate the invitation and look forward to the conversation here for the next hour and a half.
Awesome.
We kid, Randy. I hold you in a high place as well, and
thank you.
I got to get to know you last year at Columbus. A friend of ours, a mutual friend of ours, invited us all out to dinner, and I got to pick you and Jim Drew's head during dinner.
Right.
And I found out that you guys are just normal model builders too.
Yeah, well, and Jim and I go way back. We met, actually, I think we met might have been at an IPMS convention here in Dayton, Ohio. I don't recall for sure, but and then we collaborated on a whole series of articles for Scale Auto back in the late 90s called Low Buck High Tech Detailing. And I've learned a ton of things from Jim Drew. He is an incredible builder, as you all know, and is very creative in generating ideas on how to replicate items in scale for the cars we build.
So yeah, after having dinner with Randy and Jim, I realized that they're just normal guys, and Randy and I have seen each other at a couple shows since then. And great guy, you're a great guy, Randy. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. That's likewise.
Thank you.
It's been great getting to know you better at the shows as well. And yeah, it was good. We had a chance to talk more at NNL East.
Yeah. So getting back to your building theory. I assume that you pre-build just about the whole car before you even think about paint and and putty and all that. Is that true, or do you like assembly, like build the whole engine and then make the chassis fit around it or whatever?
Yeah, it depends probably on the project, but by and large, at least on the large scale major projects, as I described earlier, those I typically have every piece fabricated and either dry fit or, a lot of these bolt together so they can be put together, taken back apart, and everything is created before I do much, if any, final paint and detailing. Now, on some of those, though, that will include having all of the fuel lines already cut to length, created, installed, and then removed back out so you can paint the fittings and detail the rest of the engine, paint the frame and all that. So a lot of these pieces already are in existence before I start painting much of anything, especially chassis and body. Usually the body work, if there's a lot of body work involved, the body will be created, modified, all that body work's done, a lot of different coats of primer to get it looking the way it is. And then when you get it pretty close to the way you want it, it goes in that last coat of primer. And then any remaining assemblies are finished before then tearing it all back down and painting the body with the final color coats.
So Lewis and Marcos are in the chat here, and I'm sure that they would want to know: are you a lacquer guy? Are you a base coat guy?
I probably tend more towards lacquer paint. Nothing against base coat, clear coat. I've used that on full scale projects. I've used it on some models. I find that I really like the lacquers because they go on so thin, they cover well, they set up quickly, and you can go back and fix things more readily. At least I can. I am not a very good painter. You guys are building models and painting a new model every month. I build models and I paint a new model every 5 years, so I don't get a lot of painting practice. And it shows, I think. But and also building a lot of race cars, they're not shiny, they're not clear coated, so I don't have a need for burying it under a 2K clear or something like that. It would be incorrect actually for the subjects I'm building.
Right. Yeah. Whereas everything I do is 2K'd and polished. And
yeah. Right. And I've done some of those for other topics, let's say other subjects, but by and large, yeah, it's lacquer paints for the most part whenever I can. Well, the Greenwood Corvette, I just shot it with Tamiya white right out of the can, the bodywork. No airbrush, no thinning. The parts are big enough and they're not complex. There's not a lot of detail that you're going to bury. And, I was comfortable with the cans, so why not?
Love it.
Yeah, mark these words. Mark these words. Marcos Cruz.
I don't believe that, Marcos.
I don't believe it
I
either.
went Salt Lake to my break-ins for the day. There's a couple things I think are kind of unique about your building style. One is you often build large scale,
Yes.
which I've never built anything larger than 1/24 scale.
Wow.
So that marvels me by itself. The other thing that I think is unique about what you do is, like, I remember looking at your Corvette at the NL East, and there was like layers of detail. Like I think of it as models within models. You know, the engine is a kind of a model by itself. The suspension parts are models by themselves. Like there's just so much layer upon layer of detail, and it doesn't look like anything's missing. Like if I build a car, you know, there's lots of liberties of imaginary, you know, engine components that aren't really there. But with your stuff, like you've replicated every single part of it.
And that is the downside of 1/12 scale, building in 1/12 scale. The upside is it's easier to make a lot of those pieces because they're twice as big as the usual scale most people work in. And so they're a little easier to replicate. But the downside is you can't fake a bolt head with a dot of paint. You have to have a bolt head there. And so it does create the need to have every piece that would be on the full-size car has to be duplicated on the model. And funny you mentioned it about individual pieces being models. That was a mindset that I learned I had to adopt many years ago when working on these major projects, because taking so long to finish something, it can be kind of disheartening to, you know, I've been working on this for 3 years and I don't have a model done yet. But if I were to step back and say, okay, I'm building a model of the wheel and tire, and then I do that, and I think of that as a model in and of itself, I get the sense of satisfaction. Hey, I finished the wheels and tires.
Celebrate, right?
The level of detail, the level of scrutiny, intensity, whatever you want to call it, is going to be there throughout the components, so that when they all come together into the final car, that level of building is maintained, and you don't just hurry something along. Oh yeah, it needs a drive shaft, so I better throw a drive shaft in it. But no, I'm building a model of a drive shaft, so I got to do U-joints and caps and bolts and grease fittings and all that sort of thing. So
you're running a marathon.
Yeah, it's a psychological thing with me to have. At least you can feel good about, oh, I finished that. I finally built a model of the Die-Hard battery. So,
so do you have a lathe, Randy?
I do. I have. Okay. It's an Atlas lathe that I purchased in the early '80s. It was built in the '50s. It's as old as I am, and it's a nice little 6-inch. It'll turn a 6-inch diameter part. It's an interesting machine tool in that it was created back in those days as a teaching tool for tradesmen. So it was used at the schools where they would teach people how to machine. So it has all the features and functions that the larger lathes would have, such as the back drive gears and the automatic feed for the compound and all that, but it's just smaller. And of course, being industrial in nature, it lasts forever. I've, like I said, been using it since the early '80s. It's been around since the late '50s, and it's just a real workhorse. It does a fine job for what I do.
So for say like the nuts and bolts and the hex bolts and stuff like that, do you get those from RV Motion, or you just make your own?
Actually, both, depending on what the need is. For the sprint car, I ended up having to make there were a lot of specialty bolts on that vehicle, and I ended up having to make those out of brass stock. But I also ordered a lot of actual threaded nuts and bolts from, at the time, it was called Scale Hardware. And I think it was Bob Breslauer, maybe the name. I'm probably mispronouncing it, but he ran the company and he stocked all these miniature nuts and bolts. And I ordered a ton of stuff from him for the sprint car. By the time I worked on the Greenwood Corvette, he had sold the business to Model Motor Cars. They still call it Scale Hardware on the website, but it's part of Model Motor Cars. And they have an assortment of their metric as well as US, or what I want to say, standard SAE. Thank you, SAE. They have both, but you can scale them out. And actually, when I was trying to decide what scale to build the sprint car in, I generated a big spreadsheet with all the standard bolt sizes on a race car of that type, and then converted all those to 1/8 scale, 1/12 scale, 1/16, 1/24. And then I entered into that spreadsheet all the bolt sizes that you could buy commercially, the 4/0 160s, the 0/0 90s, and then the metric ones as well, and did a look across, and it's like, well, most of them line up really nice in 12 scale. So we'll go with 12 scale. Plus the Sunoco Camaro was 12 scale. So it seemed like a good decision. But yeah, so I'll buy from Model Motor Cars. I buy simulated ones from RB Motion. I used his fittings for all the fuel lines and oil lines on the Corvette. Those were all from RB Motion. Usually I made my own, but that car just had so many fittings that it's like that would take too much time. So I let him do that work for me. And a very large order with Mr. Bentley for those.
He was happy to have you.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope so. He does good work, and it's a unique skill set that's not really maybe fully appreciated. There's a lot of precision machinists out there in the world, but there aren't a lot of miniature machinists out there in the world. There's the difference. And
sure.
Because when I was still working, we did a lot of machining on the products I worked on, and I took some of the parts I was building for the sprint car in and showed them to our machining guy. He looks at him, he goes, "Those aren't parts, those are burrs." They were literally the size of what he would pick off of the parts and throw away. So yeah, it's a different world, as we know. We're always in a different world.
So that's your background is in machining?
No, my background is automotive engineering.
Okay.
Yep, I started in '79 with a division of General Motors at the time, working on suspension programs, and later in my career moved over to brakes, and it's still for the same basic company, although that's a whole nother story that we're not going to take a lot of time on. But as companies go, they change names and they merge and get bought and sold and so on and so forth. But so yeah, my 42 years were spent on brakes and suspension. So I know a lot of chassis components, and being an engineer in the automotive field helped my model building. But I have to say my model building helped me be a better engineer as well, because you know how things are made or need to be made. You know how things go together, so they look right, so they fit right. And so
they could be worked on, right?
Yes, and that too. So it was a neat relationship there. The career and the hobby worked for each other.
Except for you had to explain it to people, right?
Sorry?
But so you had to explain yourself to people as to why that won't work or this will work.
Yeah, true.
I'm curious, do you go through a design process before you do drawings or CAD work to figure out what you're going to build before you build it, or you just start building?
For the major projects and even some of the mid-level ones, yes, there'll be drawings. I'm old school. I never learned CAD yet. Maybe I'll still take that up in retirement. Who knows? But I just do pencil on paper. For the Greenwood Corvette, I made a number of drawings of the chassis, because as you look at the photos, you just have to keep studying, okay, where does this piece go? What's it connected to? and then I can convert that to a two-dimensional drawing so that I know everything fits. Because, you know, you start with, okay, here's the engine, and a big block Chevy engine is so big, and you can get those dimensions, so you know everything's got to fit around that. And making the drawing just helps me be sure that I've got, you know, the four corners in the right place, the track width, front and rear, the wheelbase is correct, the major components, engine, transmission, fuel system, driver, all those are where they belong. And that way I know as it comes together, I'm not going to have any major, why is this not fitting? You know, why do I have this component in the way now where this should go? So yeah, there's some drawings involved.
Sean, you do a lot of 3D artwork for, you know, for the illustrations and stuff. So we know
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I've never. I mean, I will do some sketch works if I'm going to build something from scratch, but I'm not. I'm more of a designer, less of an engineer.
Yeah.
So I will sort of, you know, take a lot of. I'll do things more by eye.
Sure.
I'm also not a perfectionist either, right? So that's good enough.
Well, I was building a NASCAR, Pontiac Grand Prix NASCAR, Richard Petty's car for the '88 season, before that kit existed. Actually, before the car even existed. I had gotten some advanced photos of the car, and we happened to have one at work, so I could measure all the body panels. So I'm converting the Oldsmobile, the Hardee's Oldsmobile, into the Richard Petty Pontiac Grand Prix. So in the midst of that, I'm thinking, well, this thing's looking pretty good. This was way before digital cameras. And so I took a few pictures of the body in primer. And when the film got developed and the prints came back, I looked at them and go, that's horrible. The roof line was all wrong. The door line, the door sill was in the wrong place. What I learned was when your eye is looking at a three-dimensional object, like the model itself, it corrects for those kind of things, and your eye doesn't see it. When you take a photo of it and look at a two-dimensional photo, it jumps right out at you, and you know there's something wrong. So that's what got me started taking a lot of photos of my projects as I worked on them, because the same thing holds true for, well, yeah, that bolt looks good there. That line looks like the right size. You take a picture, you look at the picture, like, no, that's too huge. That's just wrong. But your eye corrects more in 3D than it does in 2D. There's probably a scientific reason for that. I don't know what it is, but that's the way it works.
That's interesting. That's a good tip.
I remember our conversation in Columbus, and we were kind of comparing what you do versus what I do. Mm-hmm. And you had said that you can't build or won't build a box stock model. Does that still hold true? Can we get you to build a box stock someday?
It would be difficult for me to do that. It's just it would probably have to be a Tamiya kit of some sort.
Okay.
Just because, you know, you open the box and you think, well, this looks pretty good, and then you're building along, and then you get to a certain component. It's like, what is this blob supposed to be? And it's just, oh, this was the battery. Oh, okay, good thing. It had a number on it. So that's my problem with box stock. But, you know, a true great model builder would be able to take those blobs, and with the right detail painting and working, they make it look very, very convincing. Again, I'm not the artist. I'm just engineer building small cars.
Tim Kalankowicz says Randy should build the VC67 GTO. There's been a lot of bashing of that kit on the internet.
Yeah, I've seen that. I haven't seen the kit, but I hear it's pretty good. I'm kind of doing the next best thing, Tim. I started with the old MPC Dodge Charger for this dirt track Charger I'm building, and
Ooh.
that's a rough kit. But fortunately for the stock car, you don't use a lot of it. So
you're not using much of that body.
What-
Just the
what-
body.
and actually the body work, I'm trying to. A fellow club member challenged me to replicate the car as it retired from racing, which is all dented and scratched and dirty. And for some reason I took him up on that. And so now I've got to do the dents in the body panels and try to figure all that out. It's a whole new area for me. It's really more into the artistry than into the engineering again.
And is it based on the 1/16th petty Charger? Is that what it?
No, this is a 25th scale. I should have done it in the 1/16th, but I decided to go 1/25th scale with it and still try to put a pretty good amount of detail into it. It'll be kind of a mid-level to major project, somewhere in between those. It's a continuum. Let me show it to you.
Mr. Duff, you've been kind of quiet tonight.
I'm just this was without making it sound like a blame. It was your guest. I'm letting you do the interview.
I'm going to show you here without letting it fall off the plate, but there it is.
Rock on.
And,
Nice.
Ended up using the body out of that MPC kit and the chassis out of the Revel kit. And you saw some brass panels there to be able to, because like the hood needs to be scale thickness to clear all that big Hemi engine under the hood. And so form that out of brass. Have started forming some of the fenders and things out of aluminum, but don't have those fully done yet. But looks like it could work.
Somebody said to use aluminum foil for the.
Yeah,
for the
I
dents.
found some aluminum 5/1000 aluminum foil off of Amazon, and it's on a roll. It works very well. There was an earlier attempt at the hood in aluminum. Let me see if I can get it so it doesn't have the light. Yeah. So there we go. That's a little better. But I ended up using brass because the hood didn't really need to be dented, and I needed to be able to solder the hinges to it for strength. So that's why the hood ended up doing it with brass. And
did you make like a cast of the kit hood, or did you?
Basically, it's the kit hood, with about 3/8 of an inch of resin on the back of it, so it's rigid. So then brass or aluminum, you can just put it on top of it and then work it and form it to the shape. So it becomes the forming buck.
I'll be darned. Augie would have done it from scratch, but just saying.
Yes, I know. Yeah. But I'm not Augie.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sean.
I just said it was impressive.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's been fun. Hopefully we can get back to it here now that all the home improvement projects is finished up for this year, I think. And now I can get back to the model bench.
I am curious, has there been a project that you thought, oh, that's too difficult, I'm not going to try that one?
Oh, that's a great question, Sean. That is. Actually, I've been pondering my next major project because it's been, 3 years since I finished, 2-3 years since I finished the Corvette. So it's kind of getting to be time again. And I figured out that there's really no way I could commit to building a race car much newer than kind of the mid to late 70s. Because once you got into the 80s and beyond, race cars just got so complicated with all the computer control, electronics, all the different subsystems. It's not that you couldn't do it. I mean, because you could build all those little pieces, but how long would it take, to do all those parts? It would be a major commitment, maybe I just haven't found the topic that I'm that emotionally attached to. That's the other aspect of those major projects is when you're going to spend 3 years, 5 years, however long building them, you've got to be really in love with that topic and to see it through.
Yeah, sure.
And there's not that many cars out there that I'm that emotionally attached to at this point.
What was the emotional attachment for the Corvette, the Greenwood Corvette?
I first saw that car race at Road America in 1975. I was in high school at the time, and so youthful enthusiasm probably had something to do with it. But if you've ever seen a big black Corvette out on the road course, I don't know how you could see that and not be changed, because they were monsters. They were, compared to everything else, they were big, they were loud, they pounded the pavement literally. As Peter Egan wrote in an article once, Corvette mechanics didn't so much jack up the car as they pushed the earth down below them, and so they could work on them. They just were incredible cars, and I'd always had an attachment to production cars turned into race cars. I've always found those very fascinating because you have the basis there in the production vehicle, so you still see that basic shape, but now it's been turned into a purpose-built race car, and there's been a lot of modifications. I don't know why, just that's always interested me.
So go ahead, James.
Well, I mean, I don't want to interrupt, but all right, Randy, we know where you're at now. I think all of us at some point seen that Corvette show up at either Salt Lake City or Acme or NNL East.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, this all started somewhere back in the days of yore there. So how did you get your start building? Is it some of your dad or grandfather somebody got you into? Where did Randy Derr start from to get to where you're at now?
All right, yeah, good question, James. My model building started in the roughly the mid 60s, early to mid 60s. My dad and I were racing slot cars at the time, and in those days he would buy 25th scale plastic model kits, take the body out of them and adapt it to the slot car chassis to make something that there wasn't a slot car of. And he had one of those kits set aside to turn into a slot car. It was the Ram Chargers Hodges Dodges car. It was, I think, the Johan kit, if I'm not mistaken. And I grew up in Iowa, and in the country, very rural area in the farmland, and so there wasn't a lot going on many summer days. And I saw that kit, and I thought I'd like to build that kit. So I gave him a call at work, and I asked him if I could build that kit just as a model. I knew he wanted to make a slot car out of it. Fortunately for me, he said, yes, go ahead. And that was the first model I built. And it just went from there. We went to all the local dirt track stock car races when I was growing up there. And so I built a lot of stock cars in my early modeling days, and a lot of kit-based things, obviously. But when I was 10 years old, we went to Road America for the Can-Am races. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Can-Am series. That was also along the same lines as the big, noisy, powerful Corvettes. It was huge tires, big block Chevys, fuel injection. Anything goes in terms of suspension, design, aerodynamics were being sorted out in those days with the Chaparrals and the McLarens and all those cars. And after seeing those at the age of 10, I, of course, fell in love with those cars, came back home and wanted to build a model of a Can-Am car. But there weren't any Can-Am car kits in those days to speak of. And I had this 12 scale Tamiya Lotus 49, and it had seen better days. So I took the wheels and tires from that, and I built a body shell for a Can-Am car out of cardboard and contact paper. And half, but when you're 10, 11 years old, it's what you do. And so I built two of those like that, out of the cardboard and contact paper. And then when I was in high school, I started working at a local dime store, and we had a section where they sold vinyl records. You remember those, 45s and the LPs, the 33 and a third LPs. And between the LPs, they had these big sheets of white plastic with the artist's name at the top of them. And those would get changed out as artists came and went. They'd get dirty, they'd get used up, whatever, and they get thrown away. Well, I salvaged those out of the trash, and they were 12-inch by 12-inch, 40 thousandths thick, white plastic styrene. And
Yay.
yeah, so then I started scratch building Can-Am cars using Tamiya kits for the wheels and tires and the engine. And of course, the Can-Am cars were a monocoque construction, so the chassis could be built out of the sheet plastic. The body was out of the sheet plastic. And I did a series of those. I did 2 of those while I was in high school, and then I worked on one through college and finished it right after graduating from college. And that's really where I got started with the scratch building. It was by need, not by choice. It was the only way to build what I wanted to build. And that's also how I got started in the 112 scale, I think, too. It's a neat scale to work in.
Did your dad teach you a lot of skills, or how did you pick up the skills that you had?
Well, yes, he was a licensed plumber, electrician, a welder. He did a lot of repair work. I worked with him as often as I could, so I know I learned a great deal from him. He had modified a number of those model cars in the day to make slot cars, so always was impressed by what he did with those. So learned some of that. The model building skills really just kind of developed on their own, so to speak, because there was no club to be part of out in Iowa. It was just me working in my bedroom on my desk, building models. And, Auto World was one way to get some exposure, but most of what I learned was from Model Car Science magazine. And I found the work of Don Emmons to be very influential in my building, because he did that. Detail for Real was the name of his column in that magazine, and it spoke to me in terms of he's making models look like real cars, because you got to remember back in the 60s and 70s, model cars were on kind of a dangerous path with all the crazy customs and very unrealistic designs. The wilder, the better. Not to bash the gentleman that created them, but we remember zingers, and they were a neat concept, very popular, but to me, they weren't realistic because they weren't replicas. They were meant to be cartoonish. And so Don Emmons' work was a real important part of what I learned from the magazine. Also, Dennis Doty did a lot of scratch building. He had a 1/8 scale Jaguar that was like a multi-part feature in the magazine. He scratch built the chassis out of brass, reformed body panels, and so learned a lot from that article as well. And then when I graduated from college, moved out here to Ohio, I just happened to fall into a local group of model builders that contained Bill Coulter, Wayne Moyer, Tom Krieger, John Wise. The list goes on and on. There just happened to be a really strong core of top level builders here in the Dayton area that I fell into, and just always learning from them. And of course, the NNLs in those days were huge events, and builders coming from all over the country. And in those days, it was all about sharing techniques, not like the contests of the 60s and 70s where you held those secrets because those were your competitive advantage.
Oh,
the NNL, allowed you to share that because you weren't competing.
So
That's what I prefer.
Yeah, same here. And so you learned a lot in those days from everybody. And like I said, Jim Drew was a big influence, learning from him how he did things. And there were obviously many, many other builders out there that you could take tips from and run with.
So where along the lines does try to think of the best way to phrase this, just to sort of become a like, hey, I'm really, really good at this, and I'm going to make these. And I say this in the most loving, justful way possible. I'm going to go crazy and build these giant 3-year projects that are going to be on the cover of magazines, and I'm going to be, you know, I didn't realize that when you start this, you don't realize you're going to be as well known as you are now. But you know what I mean? Like James or Sean or we could build a model car, and we could spend a lot of time on it, be very proud of the end result. But it's not even a next level. It's like 5-6 levels up. There's a level you're at that I think requires a certain mindset to be in to build something, you know, like you did. I know you originally from the Sunoco car that was on the cover of Scale Auto. That's my as far as I can remember back, because that would have been late high school, I think, when that car came out. That's where Randy Derr pops into my modeling knowledge base. But like there's a step even from just scratch building. A lot of people scratch build this, that, the other thing. From going from like, oh yeah, I built some stuff that I like, to being on that, like Sean said, top 10 models of you know, all time currently, however you want to phrase that. But like there's a step there. There's a decision I think that takes place. You're like, this is what I'm gonna do. Because it seems we talked offline, you have your smaller projects, you have your midline projects, and then you have these multi-year masterpieces. Like something occurs to you there. Like what's that switch? Where does it take place that this is going to be my focus? I'm going to build these things. These you know, they're teetering on that line of where modeling ends and art form begins.
Mm-hmm.
Whether you believe it or not, but that's the way I feel about it.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I don't know if it's a decision that, okay, I'm going to go try and do all that. It was, for me, it was always the challenge of trying to make a replica of a full-size car or piece or whatever in scale that was very convincing, that you could take a photo of and look at the photo and say, is that the model or is that the real car? So that was my challenge, was how well can I pull that off? How well can I replicate? And I think the major projects just kind of come out of that, because in order to pull that off, you have to commit to detailing everything so much. One thing I've always tried to do is I've always tried to learn something new with every major project, a new technique, a new method, new materials. With the sprint car, it was making my own resistance soldering rig and learning how to use that. It was resin casting to be able to make multiples of the wheels and tires and other pieces. It was learning how to make dry transfer markings, because on that scale of car, the markings on the full-size car are hand painted on the body panels. So if I'd have done them as water slide decals, you'd have the film. Can't have that. Needed to be dry transfers. So, there's a company making a kit to make your own dry transfers. Let's see how that works. And so it was just learning something new, and it sort of just grew on its own. It wasn't a conscious decision that, 30 years ago I set out to be where I am today. It was more just incremental. Okay, I want to build a replica of the Sunoco Camaro, so here's what we're going to do. Now I want to build a replica of this Greenwood Corvette. What's that going to take? Because there's really not a kit. And there was probably a pivotal model, and I didn't even realize it until I was putting together a presentation for a different talk I did earlier this year. Back when I was in grad school, a good friend of mine at school we were at Purdue at the time, and there was, of course, Indianapolis just a few miles away. And that was the year of the Interscope IndyCar, the real swoopy black car with the pink, white, and yellow, or pink, white, and orange markings. Danny Angaius drove it. And my friend just fell in love with that car, and he wanted to know if I could build a model of it. And it's like, well, maybe I can. We'll have to give it a try and see. So we had just a handful of pictures that we had taken at Carburetor Day up at Indy, and I sat down with a 20th scale Tamiya F1 kit and started modifying it to look like this Indy car. And the real pivotal part was I needed a decal for the side part of the car that was Goodyear. It was just a Goodyear logo, white letters, had to be so big to fit the model. And my wife and I spent an entire Saturday hitting every hobby store in Indianapolis looking for a Goodyear decal of that shape and size. Needless to say, there wasn't one. So then, okay, what am I going to do? This was before computer graphics. This was before I could make dry transfers, before I could make water slide decals even. So I sat down and I tried hand painting it, and it came out acceptable. And that's I think when I realized, if you just try something, you may surprise yourself at how good it ends up. And maybe not the first one, but by the time you do it 3 or 4 times, it's looking like you need it to. And then that just grew, from that replica into other replicas, that because there's just more challenge in those for me to make something a scale replica of an actual car than just my own designs. It's just what I'm attracted to.
I'm curious because you're a highly competitive modeler. I mean, and obviously you go to a lot of contests.
Mm-hmm.
How much does competition factor into your thinking when you're building a model? Do you? I mean, it sounds like you're very passionate about the projects that you pick, but I'm also interested to know, do you think about, I also want to build something that I know will score well or showcase a certain talent, or talk a little bit about that, if you don't mind.
Sure. Yeah, that's a good question, Sean, because I think that realization came later in my model building, even maybe after the Sunoco Camaro, because I built that just because I wanted to build a replica of that car. And because of being big scale, I detailed it out, but then took it to the Southwest Challenge and was beaten there by Cody Grayland and his 20 scale Williams F1 car with all the machine parts. And so I knew I wanted to take that to GSL, so I needed to know what improvements needed to be made. And so I talked with the judges, and they thankfully were honest with me, and here this area could have been improved, and they were right. I had rushed some things because this was just the dawning of that I'm building a model of every piece kind of philosophy. And that's when that realization hit, is that you had to have that perspective on it to be competitive. And so it grew out of that. I went back, made those improvements, took the car to GSL later on and won Best of Show with it. So it paid off to understand what needed to be improved. One thing that I have tried not to do, because you cannot do this without setting yourself up for major disappointment and failure. I don't sit down and say, I'm building this model to go win this contest. You can't do that, because you could build a model. You take 5 years, build absolutely gorgeous model, set it on the table at that contest, and in walks a guy who spent 10 years building an equally, if not better, incredible model of greater, content. And so then where does that leave you? Now you're just disappointed because your goal to win the contest is out the window. But if your goal is, I want to build the best model I can of this car, you've achieved your goal, and you can be happy with that, proud of that, regardless of the contest. Because we all know contests, there's too many factors out of the builder's control. There's, like I just said, other competitors can one-up you rather readily. Judges, they're human. They have their own biases. They make mistakes, and that can happen. You just can't control how those decisions are made, because it's a subjective measurement. And so to avoid that disappointment, just don't try to build to win a contest. Build the best model you can of whatever subject you're building, and then if you want to compete, go compete and see how you do. If you do well, great. If you don't, learn what needed to be improved, and take that constructive criticism as it's given as constructive, and learn from it, because we're all blind to the flaws in our models oftentimes. And so you also, one of the things I think, well, I know has made me a better model builder is getting to judge a number of contests. And you learn a ton from judging, especially if you're working with some experienced judges and they have been through it a few times. And you start realizing, okay, here's how those decisions are made. Because there's always, dozens of great models on the table. So how do you sort out what's the best one in that class even? And, James Duff, you're aware of this, you're judging the past weekend. Sadly, it comes down to looking for mistakes, and that will help you separate the first from the second from the third, and so on. And so when you're building, you have to be willing to, and very honest with yourself, and recognizing that's not as good as it needs to be. Whatever it was you just spent 4 hours doing isn't good enough to win the contest you're trying to win, or to live up to your expectations. So you got to do it again. And usually 3 or 4 times into it, you get a lot better at it. Maybe the second time even. But I've got a whole box of parts that I could probably almost build another Corvette out of from that Greenwood car.
I was going to ask if you have like a scrap heap.
Oh yeah, for sure. There were some of those aluminum interior panels that I made 6 or 8 of. The Sebring markings on the hood, on the front of the car, I made 8 copies of those into the decals I needed. I was down to the 8th one for one of the letters in that Sebring before I got it exactly the way I wanted it on the car. So you got to be willing to keep working at it until it's to the level you want it to be, and that it's going to take to do what you want to achieve at a contest, for example.
I like to
try.
try.
We have to drag Mr. Chester kicking and screaming into judging. This is a conversation that we were having in the group. That picture that you circulated around, that was me, you, Randy, and Marcos. Randy and I were trying to get Marcos and James to get into judging, because it really does. If for 2 factors: one, you realize what judges are looking for, and in some cases that's handy. Whether or not that's what is technically correct, you could argue that depends on the judging and the show and the day. But also just that the appreciation of being able to look at work critically and then apply it to your own work, because judging is not a whiz bang show. Well, at least it shouldn't be. Like, oh, that's really pretty, I like that. So no, this is, especially on an IPMS Nationals level, that is a very technical judging aspect at that point. That's a lot of construction before bling, and so we have to drag Mr. Tester into just one round of it. I'm not turning you into a Nationals judge too, but one of these days we'll drag him kicking and screaming.
Yeah, it's an eye opener, James. You'll be surprised that you'll see a beautiful model on the table, and if it's a contest where the judges get to really study the models, you'll pick it up, and right there on the gas tank, copyright monogram 1986. I don't remember that being on a 66 Chevelle. So it's surprising what us builders can overlook on our creations.
A lot of my muscle cars don't have lower radiator hoses just because they're too hard to put on.
Oh, they are, aren't they? They're the worst. The lower ones are impossible.
Mine don't even have engines.
Yeah.
That was too much work.
There you go. I went down that path for a while. Curbside's a lot of fun. Lets you be very creative. And so there's that. I mean, that's a whole different aspect of the hobby, and one that's very welcome. Some of the best stuff is on the curbside table.
Yeah, we're
on what you like.
Completely opposite ends of the modeling spectrum, but I totally appreciate the work that you do, because it's not one that I even aspire to even try, but then I just marvel at the detail and the craftsmanship and the dedication, like you talked about, to
Thank
do it 8 times till you've got it perfect, you know.
Yeah, well, thanks. It's some people say it's a disease, but I've talked to my brother who's a psychologist, and he says it's more of a condition. So
Now, when you have one of these big multi-year, we're going to wow the world projects going on, do you have other things in the background? Do you have a curbside, or I know we before we went on the air, you mentioned a 1/43rd scale
mhm.
a piece. Do you build those concurrently? Like you have something else going on, so you could take a step back. I realize you're talking about building the model as individual pieces of models, and
Mhm.
that being the motivation over a long span. But are there, things going on with the big scale project?
Not typically, not for the big scale major ones. I tend to immerse myself in those because I find there's just so many things that I have to keep straight in my head in terms of the technical details that if I go off on a different project, I'll forget or just, get distracted with it. There's enough of life's distractions from the project that I don't need to add to that. I have, though, since retirement, found that it is kind of fun to have a couple simple ones going on at the same time. Those I can jump back and forth. But when I'm in a major one, it's usually okay to just have that as the focus because there's so many different aspects of it. If I get frustrated or bored or whatever you want to say, stuck on a particular aspect of it, I can leave that aspect for now and go work on a different portion of the model because it all needs to be done eventually. And there's no necessary order always. You've got some, flexibility in terms of when you complete different parts of it. So I'm kind of stuck on this front suspension design. I'm still figuring out how I want to do it. I'll go work on the rear one for now. And so there's enough ways to distract yourself within the project without having to go off and start something else.
Do you have a favorite part and a least favorite?
I do. Honestly, the research is great fun. Just seeing what you can find out and start understanding how the real car was built, and getting into the mind of the designers and the builders of the full-size car. Why did they do it this way? Why was that there? Learning about the car. As an engineer, I find that fascinating. Actual build itself, I love building tube frames and roll cages. I don't know why. They're just a lot of fun for me. You see a lot of progress fast, I guess. My least favorite, probably painting. I've had a long history of less than successful painting projects over the years. Many of my major projects are marked by multiple paint jobs to get it the way I need it to be. So, painting's tough. It's too much chemistry or something. There's a lot of technique in painting and a lot of learning from experience. And as I said, building a car and painting one every 3 to 5 years, you don't really learn how to paint all that well.
Right. That's probably my favorite thing is painting and polishing and decaling. And then the rest of it is all just boring monotony to finish the car.
Yeah, but that's the great thing of this hobby is every project has something for everybody. And everybody gets to showcase their particular interests and talents in their projects. Whether it's the decaling, the painting, the detail work, the weathering. There's just so many facets to each model that let everybody show off their skills. The design, making their own customs or street rods or whatever. It's just a neat part of the hobby.
I'm curious, how much time do you spend a week or a day or a month or building?
Who knows? It can vary pretty dramatically.
You build every day or?
No, sadly, I don't get a chance to. Even in retirement, now finishing the Corvette, I was in the middle of that project when I retired. So my regular job got replaced by finishing the Corvette. And so there I came to the workbench and worked on it about well, ended up being about 4 days a week, but kind of the 9 to 5, not really, but more of a full day of working on it. But usually, no, projects can even sit for several weeks or months without much progress. And then you'll get back to the bench and have the time and make a lot of progress. So there's really no consistent schedule at this point yet in my life that I can say, yep, I always spend this many hours every week. It just doesn't work out that way. And some weeks you just don't feel like working on it either. So can't force it.
I don't watch TV. I don't play sports. I don't care about my yard. I build model cars.
There you go.
Your neighbors.
3 hours plus a day.
Excellent. You're a dedicated builder. See, I let
love it.
all those other things distract me, and I'm just not dedicated enough to the hobby. It's clear.
Randy,
Sean,
have you ever?
Go ahead.
Have you ever? I mean, it sounds like you don't keep a running tab, but have you ever sat down and figured out roughly how much time, not like because it's over a long time, but how many hours really go into one of these?
I have.
builds?
Yep, I have. With the sprint car, I did sort of keep a mental listing of it as I worked on it. And that one I figured was probably around 1,500 hours, maybe something like that. The Greenwood Corvette, probably twice that. I do know, because I built a series of detailed replicas for a race car team owner back in the 90s and early 2000s. And they had full suspension, full engine, all the lines and fittings and hoses and wiring and everything. They were replicas. And those took somewhere around 150 to 200 hours to construct, because I kept track of my time so I could know what
You were
to
billing
construct
it, right?
for those. And looking back on that, it's almost hard to believe that I could do them that quickly, because I'm not sure. I think I've slowed down. I think it's like the guy on Monty Python, Ministry of Silly Walks. The walk's gotten kind of silly, and it takes me forever to get anywhere now. So, you just start working on this thing, and you just have to keep doing better and more detail, and it just compiles.
Has any of the have you ever worked with any of the manufacturers, the model kit manufacturers, or ever consulted with them?
I worked with actually Dremel, the people that make the motor tools. Got connected to them back when we were doing the Hot Rod magazine contests over at Indianapolis in the when was that? The 80s, 90s?
Yeah, late 80s. I remember that.
Yeah, and so they were real nice folks, and I did some demonstrations of how to use their tools at those shows, and then they would send me prototypes of some of their tools they were thinking of bringing out, and I'd use them, test them, give them some pointers on, okay, this turns way too fast for plastic. You need to have a slower speed on the variable speed, and they factored those things in. It was a pretty neat relationship for a while. In terms of kit manufacturers, only once I was asked by Monogram, Bob Johnson at Monogram, to build well, they were bringing out the IMSA Mustangs. Remember those kits?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And they didn't have even test shots yet, but I had scratch built a Mercury Capri that was running in the Trans Am series at that time. Very similar car, same chassis. And they saw that, Bob Johnson saw that, I think at Toledo maybe, I don't know where. And so he asked if I could build a curbside of the Motorcraft Mustang to look like what was going to be in the kit, so they could show it at the Richter show in Chicago. So I built that for them. They paid nicely for that, and it went to the Richter show, and I have no idea whatever happened to it after that. But, it gave them something to show at the hobby show, so that people would know what this kit was going to look like when it was released. But yeah, so my involvement with manufacturers has been quite limited. Probably I don't buy enough kits. You know, that must be it. They track that sort of thing.
Do you have a stash?
A very small one. I have maintained. It's less than 100 kits. It's probably even less than that now because I purged a few a couple of years ago. Took them to a swap meet and sold them because I know I'm not going to build them. I realized after the Sunoco car and a few others that I'm just not going to go build those kits because they're not what I do anymore. And so, and you know, I'm not going to even raid them to kit bash usually because I'll look at them and go, what is that blob supposed to be? Remember the earlier conversation?
Right.
And
I
so
could build a better one. Yeah.
Yeah, I can sit down and build a better one. And now with 3D printing available, you know, getting those kind of pieces is a whole lot easier. And so kit bashing becomes less critical and must be just part of my character flaw. It just pains me, and Tim Kalankowitz will laugh at this because it just pains me to take a perfectly complete kit and pull like the set of wheels out of it to use on something else because now it's a worthless kit. And so, but now with resin casting, I can pull those wheels out, pull a mold, cast them up, put them back in the kit, sell the kit. So always a workaround for my phobias.
Yeah, Tim's getting a lot into 3D printing stuff too.
Yeah.
With his wheel standing car that he's making right now. Amazing.
Yeah.
I don't know if you watch his channel.
I need to check that out for sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you forayed into 3D printing or using any 3D printed parts?
You know, I had nothing against 3D printing ever. It was just another tool for making parts for our models. And it was like just a super low volume kit is the way that I looked at it. But I didn't have the CAD skills, still don't. And early on, it was a situation where if you wanted to 3D print, you had to be able to make your own designs, or so I thought. Well, that world's changed, as we know. I use 3D printed parts on the Greenwood Corvette. I ordered them from Shapeways. A lot of the engine transmission pieces were there. But so the 3D printing world has changed quite a bit in the last few years. And my daughter, as a Christmas gift, got me a Anycubic printer this last Christmas. And I started doing the research and was amazed at just the literally thousands of files out there of some really good usable components: wheels, tires, chassis components, engine components, complete engines, bodies. And I've printed a number of pieces for this Dodge Charger stock car: tires, engine parts, batteries. One of my favorites, batteries. So yeah, it has its place, and I'll use it just as any other tool. The reason I kind of shied away from it was it looked like it was going to take a whole lot of time to learn how to do the design and how to do the printing, and I didn't need another hobby. I had my model car hobby. I didn't want to dilute that. But in getting it as a gift and using it, it really took no time at all to pull those files from, you know, some of those sites online, you know, Render Hub, CG Trader, those kind of things, and manipulate them enough within the software to be able to print them the way you wanted them. So it's been fun. I've had a great time with it.
I like it because I can print stuff that will never come out in kit form. That's
right.
That's what I like about it.
Complete bodies and complete cars. Right. Yeah.
Especially with like a curbside, I just downloaded a 2025, Mercedes,
Oh, sure.
So
yeah. Talk to Bill Garrett. He loves 3D printing things that will never be out in kit form.
Yeah. He's making his own.
What's that?
He's making his own for the most part.
Yeah. Right. So yeah, maybe I'll print a 3D body someday. I don't know. We'll see. But for now, it's been very useful.
James, make a mental note there. We need to get Mr. Geary on here.
Oh yeah, Bill would be great fun to talk to.
Am I making this note because Bill lives in Pennsylvania and you somehow think I know him somehow? I know who Bill Gary is, but I don't actually know him. But
he's a great guy. He's been
Yeah,
out
He's a great guy.
this way
That's
to Toledo a number of times in the past, and yeah, very amazing when he showed up with that car with the working folding convertible top and the crank up windows. Yeah, good stuff.
Yeah.
And in 1/25th scale too. Very, very challenging.
Yeah, he's a great guy. I talk to him about 3D printing every once in a while.
Good. Yeah, I'm sure he's a wealth of knowledge.
And he's so kind about it too. He always takes time.
Yep.
Never.
And that's just been a neat part of this hobby through the years, is the openness with how people share their ideas and their methods and their materials. And I think you really got to credit the NNL concept with that happening through the hobby, because it didn't used to be that way, and it certainly is now. And it's made us all better builders. And the contests are important, but really not important when you think about it. And so if you have an idea and you share it and somebody does it better than you, well, that's just how it works out sometimes. We can all learn from each other.
Yes. And going to the NNL shows, and we all get to talk with each other and get to meet each other. And, I just met Tim Kalankowitz at East, and it's the first time I had ever met him in person, but I had talked to him, earlier. Great guy. Great guy.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, there's been so many builders throughout the years that you meet at shows that you read about, and then you finally get to meet them and just develop those relationships. It's as we get older, those become more important than the models themselves in many cases.
Yeah, for sure. So back to technical questions.
Okay.
So Clay Kemp is a big 10X fan. What's your favorite adhesives?
Well, it varies with what you're trying to stick together. We talked about for styrene to styrene, when I'm scratch building body panels or something like that. Let me get the bottle off the workbench here so I remember.
Okay. Everyone take notes.
Yeah, it was the 10X 7R, but I found I couldn't find it. So I switched to this from FlexiFile, PlastiWeld.
Okay. All right.
That seems to work pretty, sorry?
That's what I used to, yeah.
Yeah, it works very well for styrene to styrene. You use one of their touch and flow applicators, and it sets up very quickly. So when I'm building those roll cages or whatever, you can make a lot of progress pretty fast. The various CA glues, two-part epoxy is a good one to use. The clear, I prefer the DevCon because it stays clear, doesn't turn yellow as quickly.
Okay.
The two-part JB weld, the JB Quick, is a 5-minute epoxy, and it's kind of gray in color. And I've used that a lot for, let me get that package here real quick. They have this, the quick weld sets up in a few minutes. The non-quick weld sets up in 24 hours. So depending on what you're doing, you might want one or the other. The other one's a little stronger than this, but for model building, this is plenty good. I've even used this quick weld for body work. I had a car where the rear bumper had to be recessed into the body work. So I covered the bumper itself with the parafilm, that stretchy masking material that the military guys use a lot of.
Yeah.
And I had the opening was bigger than the bumper, and I just filled it part way with the JB weld and pushed the bumper into place and let the JB weld kind of ooze out around it. Did a little shaping on it, but waited for it to cure, pulled the bumper out. Because of the masking on it, it would come out, and then I could shape the JB weld, and it had a perfectly inset bumper with no filling required around it because the JB Weld did the filling part.
I was thinking of that technique for, say, like the 67 Shelby GT350, that front end doesn't fit on that AMT kit at all.
Yeah.
And so I was thinking to make a 2-part epoxy putty to stick in place, but to not have it stick to both pieces. And so that parafilm you say works so that it doesn't stick.
Yeah, it did for me on that. In that case, I haven't used it a lot, but yeah, it's nice because you can stretch it out over compound surfaces, and it's very thin, and lets you then remove the part. So yeah, give it a try.
Cool.
Of course, you could try a mold release like you would use for resin casting. That could work, but you'd want to experiment with that to make sure that it doesn't, get stuck to the JB Weld. I've used the 2-part epoxy putty for forming some parts too, but very limited usage for that. Again, probably because I'm not much of an artist, but like the Greenwood car, the upholstery in the seat was all formed out of the 2-part epoxy putty because you could roll it out and mark it to look like upholstery, stitched upholstery. So.
Okay. So you kind of hand carved that.
No, it was more like working with clay, in that I rolled out a thin sheet of it, and using a razor saw, I embossed a diamond pattern in it, and so you had the diamond, but then the teeth on the razor saw blade looked like the stitches around the diamond.
I'll be darned. Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, it worked quite well. And then used pieces of styrene on either side of the epoxy putty of different thicknesses, so the saw wouldn't go all the way through and cut through the putty, but only emboss it.
Okay.
So yeah, using different glues. I've got all different kinds because the what is that Revel clear that?
Oh, the clear part cement.
Oh, contact to clear. I've had pretty good success with that for different parts. It just varies depending on what you're trying to stick together.
Gotcha. I'm going to ask you a question, but I just forgot it.
Oops.
I've got a question. It's kind of a weird one. I've never asked a modeler this before, but now I'm curious. So, I mean, we're all going to leave this earth, right, at some point. When I leave, my models, who knows what's going to happen, right? Maybe they'll end up on eBay. Maybe they'll get given away to somebody. Some little kid will play with them. Maybe they'll just end up in trash. I have no idea. I can't imagine that your models are so insignificant that there's not a plan for them. So I'm wondering, do you have a plan for what will become of your models or where they will go?
Wow. Yeah, that's a great question. Sadly, in the end, they really are that insignificant, and they could just end up in the ether. Who knows? I don't have a plan at this moment. I hope I have enough time to work on one. My hope is that in the next few years we'll see a significant permanent museum adopt a model car exhibit, and that could then be the permanent home that we seek for our creations. Certainly, I just think of the several builders here in the local area that were very talented, had great creations, and sadly they've passed away in the last few years, and their collections have just scattered to the four winds. And it's just the reality of our hobby. We put our heart and soul in these projects, but they just don't mean anything to the people taking care of what's left after we're gone. And it's something I've given a lot of thought to and would like to continue to try to work on improving for all of us to find a more permanent home for our models. because there are so many significant ones out there that you hate to see disappear.
Yeah, I almost think of yours as kind of like a level far above like the normal, model car. I sort of see yours potentially living in a museum somewhere as just piece of art.
Smithsonian or something, right?
Yeah, I mean, I see it. It's that sort of level of significance.
Well, thanks. I appreciate that very much. And yeah, that'd be pretty cool. I don't know that exists at this point in time. And again, I'm hoping that can happen in these next few years, that we could get that sort of a home for our hobby to live on beyond all of us builders.
Yeah, that would be cool.
It would be. There's a few museums out there that have some model car presence, but it's pretty limited. And so, I don't know what ends up happening there. Like some of the other builders of the past, what's happened to their collections, it's not really clear.
Yeah, I could even see something like the Peterson Automotive Museum.
Yeah, something like that
for your work.
That would be a great home for our hobby to call a permanent home for many of our creations. Yeah.
So, did you say that you've thought of your next major project, or?
Well, the Corvette was on my project list since 1975. So who knows? There's a lot of different ones out there that I think that would be neat to build, but it ends up being, can I get enough information to do them justice and build them the way I want to build them and need to build them? And you got to also think, to some degree, and this is kind of the double-edged sword of building these major projects, is if you want other people to appreciate them, they have to be a topic that other people get.
Yeah.
And I've seen that happen, and it's sad, but true, that you'll see an excellent model of some terribly obscure topic that mainly the builder only knows about, and it doesn't get the appreciation it really deserves. And you feel bad for the builder, but that's just the reality. Is we all gravitate to what we know. And so, what I find of interest is not what everybody else finds of interest. So,
case in point, Mr. Kolchuk, Gary Kolchuk, with his strange customs. You look at him and you're like, God, there's so much work there.
Oh yeah.
But it's an odd car. Like a mishmash of something.
They're highly unique. They're very imaginative. They're excellent builds, just fabulously detailed and pulled off. And they're just great. It's just there's an audience out there that you're kind of playing to.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Now this will dovetail to James's question. Something we've been trying to ask everybody we get on here. We've lifted this off of another podcast. I'll fully admit to that. But given the sort of like no constraints, sort of like time and money and all that sort of thing, is there one project that lingers in the build list that would be the one thing that you would want to build? Is the Corvette it, since it was there for so long, or is there something? Is there the Randy Derr's Magnus Opus build? His Lifetime Achievement Award goes to.
Yeah, that's a great question. I haven't sorted that one out yet. There's still a handful of topics in the running for that one, and it'll be whatever's next. But again, it's going to depend on, can I find information, and can I do it justice? So. Yeah, stay tuned. I don't have it even boiled down to the top 3 really at this point. It's a tough call.
You hear it there, here, folks. You're going to lose your best of show sometime in the future. All right, so this question's in the chat. This is a good one. Randy, do you have any advice for a beginning model car builder? I'm going to be entering my next model car contest in March and need some advice.
Very good. Well, good luck with the contest. It comes down to don't build with the hopes of winning the contest. Build to do the best job you can on the model. Learn all you can through the build. Don't be afraid to try something. You'll probably likely surprise yourself that you'll do better at it than you thought you could. And with practice, you'll get even better at it. And then just build for what you want to build and enter it in the contest. Depending on how you do, regardless of how you do, talk to the judges afterwards if you can, if they're willing to open up and get some idea of what was good on your model and what could be improved upon. Because that's kind of the downside of the judging, the contest in the judging world, is it's always quite secretive for good reasons, but it's then difficult to get the feedback to know how to do better the next time when you're the builder and wondering, well, what did I do wrong or what could I do better? So just seek out other builders in your area and learn from them, and just keep trying it. It doesn't happen overnight, but like anything else, with more practice and more experience, you'll find you get much better at it over time. So good luck with your first contest next March. Good luck.
I remember my first. It was probably one of the Glass City contests in Toledo.
Yeah.
About 96.
Okay. Yeah. It's exciting, but kind of terrifying too at times.
Yeah.
But
I did meet some people from the North Coast Automotive Modelers and joined the club shortly after. So,
and that's where the growth happens then.
Absolutely.
It's tough working this hobby in a vacuum. It tends to be a solitary hobby when you're building, obviously, but you really got to get out and learn all you can from everybody else involved, because everybody's got great ideas and great techniques, and we can all stand to learn from each other.
That's why I try and share on the YouTube
Mm-hmm.
everything that I've learned, and I just try and share it all.
Yeah, absolutely. And make the hobby better for all of us.
Well, we're getting pretty close to the end. Do you guys have any more questions for Randy? Or Randy, do you have any questions for us?
Oh, my. I didn't prepare any, so I'm sorry. I don't. Apologize for that. I guess, where will we see each other again? Anybody going to Atlanta this fall?
I won't make Atlanta.
Okay.
Thinking next big show.
It's that one in Akron, right?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah, that's
Akron,
right.
That's on the calendar. We got that one coming up, so we'll see you there.
Yep.
And,
Sean, will you make it to Akron?
I don't know. When's the date?
October 14th.
They'll kill me.
It's October 14th.
14?
Okay.
Yeah, that sounds right.
Yep. We'll see. Maybe that's close enough and far enough away in time that I could consider that.
Good.
Yep.
Love to see you.
Yeah. It'll be should be a good show. New venue there in Akron. So spread out, which they need to do. It was a great first effort. So hopefully it'll continue to grow.
Yeah, the lighting is super good at this next venue.
Excellent.
It's at a elementary school, and it's got all new lighting. So
wonderful.
Last year it was a little greenish yellow tinge, but this one's going to be much better.
Great.
Randy, if anybody wanted to check out your work, do you have anything online, website or social media or anything?
Thank you for asking. I don't have anything like that, but what I tell people is just Google my name and scale model and see what comes up. There's lots out there, through the different medias that already exist. Other videos, magazine articles. It's out there. I just don't take care of any of it myself. Another hobby I don't need,
Yeah, the less time you spend on Facebook, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm impressed by these guys that document their builds and put a video out on everything. That's impressive. I just, it's like that's a whole nother project in and of itself. And
It really is. It's another
Yeah.
hobby.
Yeah. So yeah, that's my best source of info, Sean. It's the best I can do.
Let me ask
James?
you this. Let me ask you this, Randy.
Okay.
Do you think that with sufficient practice, dedication, fortitude, whatever you want to call it, that I don't say anybody, because like there's always going to be somebody who's not as good as the next person. That's just the facts of life. Do you think that anybody could be Randy Derr if they really put their mind to it? Like, you make it sound like that I'm just nothing special and I just do all this stuff. And you're very down to earth, very humble. And I found that through talking to like people like Mark Jones and some of the other people that I consider to be, just the upper echelon builders, that you guys are always the most humble, down to earth people. Everybody seems to think that you guys would have egos because of your fame, and really realizing that we're talking about model cars and it is a very, very low fame ceiling, right? You have to know what
Yes.
you're doing in order to be famous in it, kind of thing. But like,
Right.
do you think anybody really could, if they applied themselves, be a detailed builder? Because like Sean's saying, he doesn't want to do it, and I really don't want to do it either. But that's like a question of wanting to rather than the ability of it, right?
Right, but they go hand in hand, don't they? Really, because in order to be a better builder, you have to commit to it, and that means you have to want to be a better builder, and you want to get better at the detail and understanding how the full-size cars are built so you can replicate them more accurately. And so yes, I think we all possess the ability to learn and improve our skills and get better at what we do. It's now a question of what does that mean for you as the individual? What is better for you, and what is your limit, and is there one even? Maybe not. You just keep working the hobby, just keep practicing. Don't be afraid to try something. And if it doesn't work out, what are you out? A little bit of your time and some materials. It's
Right.
It's another great thing about this hobby. It's not thousands of dollars and that great of a time expenditure to commit yourself to a project. And so just give it a try. You'll be surprised. So, yep, I think it's in all of us, or we wouldn't be in the hobby.
Thank you so much, Randy.
Well, you're very welcome. Thank you all for hosting, for asking me to be on here. I have enjoyed our conversation. Some great questions. I love the challenge of those questions. And,
Yeah, we really appreciate you being on the show today.
well, thank you so much. It's been my pleasure, obviously. And we'll look forward to seeing you all at the show somewhere down the road, either yet this year or next, or who knows where. But we'll be back out and looking for the latest, greatest creations from all of us here.
Sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you.
James, last thoughts?
All right, guys, we really appreciate you tuning in this evening for Mr. Randy Derr being our guest. Thanks to him for coming on. And, we'll be back in another 2 weeks with something we'll have to come up with between then, because with all the vacation time, we really haven't planned beyond this show. So, but we'll be back in 2 weeks with our regular stick next month. Next episode will be August kit releases and all sorts of fun stuff like that. And I've got a list of people from IPMS to contact back to have as guests, and we want to get Marcos on and some other people on. So we're going to work on guests and stuff like that. But we appreciate everybody tuning in tonight, and we'll see you guys on the other side.
Thanks. So long.
Good night.
Bye.